Good morning and welcome to another Real Conversation with Dr. Anita. I am your host, Dr. Anita Polite Wilson, and today I am so excited to have my special guest and my very, very dear friend, Ms. Vicky Brox Allen, a conflict resolution subject matter expert. Good morning, Ms. Vicky.
Good morning, Dr. Anita, and thank you for having me. This is it's a pleasure to be even in this conversation with you.
Well, this is an important conversation. I appreciate you being here. You're more than welcome. You will be back. But I wanted to have you for this particular conversation because we're coming close to the elections. And as we know, this is going to be a crucial election year. Now, before we go any further, read my lips. This conversation is not about politics. It is not about politics. But my concern is that we cannot seem to have discussions about politics without people getting all crazy. And so what I really want us to focus on is how to disagree without being disagreeable. And that seems to be a lost art, especially when it comes to politics. Now, before we get started, I want to share a couple of thoughts. You know, we have been told in business settings, two topics that are safe to talk about, sports and weather. And it occurred to me the other day, the reason that folks want you to stay away from politics is because people take their politics very, very personally. And on the one hand, I can understand that because hopefully the people who represent you have some kind of closeness to your moral standing, your moral compass. But when we talk about politics, people tend to get upset, even if you ask questions, because we take our politics very, very personally. And so it seems to me, Miss Vicky, that when we talk about politics and someone either asks us a question or they don't agree with us, we feel attacked because we feel like they're talking about us personally because we hold our political views so close to us. Is that the case? Am I reading that right?
I do. I've thought about that time and time again, and you are correct. People do feel as if you're attacking not just their point of views, but their interests. And then the flip side of that is if I can add one other point, people don't feel as if you're validating them. So in other words, here I am, and I'm talking about my political interests. You're going to fire back what you believe. So then what happens is that you have a dispute because people don't think that you're listening. They don't think that you understand. So therefore, if you're not listening, you don't understand, you don't recognize what they're saying, they do feel attacked and they don't feel validated. And
now, excuse me, there's a delay, audience. So sometimes when I think she's finished, I'm ready to jump in with my next question. So Ms. Vicky, please excuse me. But you're talking about listening. And I have noticed that as adults, we tend to listen to solve versus listen to understand. And so if we take the time to listen to understand where someone is coming from, and then to paraphrase that understanding, and I'll even go as far as saying, let me test my understanding and then repeat back what they've said. Will that help us to avoid being disagreeable while we're disagreeing?
I think that definitely is going to understand. I think that that's definitely going to work, pardon me, because oftentimes when people are listening, they're listening to respond.
Yes.
They're not listening to the entire conversation. One of the things that we've learned in communication, like what you're doing, we actively listen. That shows people you're listening. It doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with what they're saying, but you are validating what the person is saying by listening and recognizing and seeking to understand them. And when people feel as if you're not listening, they feel as if they're not being validated. And if they're not being validated, then they feel as if they're being attacked. And that's part of the problem with political conflict.
Because we feel so closely identified with our political views that even if you ask me a question, I feel like you're questioning part of who I am versus questioning why it is that I believe the way I do. Do I have that right?
You are correct. Because when we sit down and we start talking about our political candidates, our interests are associated with our political candidates. I may have an interest regarding taxes. I may have an interest regarding immigration or healthcare, and yours may be regarding police reform.
Mhm.
or socialism or whatever it is. And so what ends up happening is you have a pull. I'm not listening to you. You're not listening to me. So
Mhm.
what happens in that conversation is that we become positional.
Mm.
And you understand what I'm saying? When we become positional, I'm going to stand my ground.
Mhm.
And every time you attempt to say something, I'm not listening at this point. I'm going to fire back with why I believe the way that I believe. And then the conversation becomes competitive in nature.
Mhm.
When all it is you have an interest and I have an interest. And all you need to do is listen to my interest and I'll listen to yours.
What comes to mind is a lot of times when we have conversations that could be raising more conflict than it does to raise answers, we seem to forget that if you and I have an issue and this thing right here is the issue, when we lose sight that this is the issue and I start to see you as the issue, that's when we have problems. So
Exactly.
help us to understand when we're having disagreements and we want to avoid becoming disagreeable, what can we do to help us to remember that the thing that we're partnering with in conversation is to really deal with this issue right here and not to beat up on each other?
Right. So basically what you want to do is to partner with someone. So you talk about being disagreeable. So when you talk about being disagreeable, I believe that you're talking about the behavior
Yes.
and the actual dispute, right?
Yes. Yes.
People going back to the beginning of time have always had differences.
Mhm.
You and I are different. So we have different needs and we have different interests. And the only thing that we need to do, and it's so easy, is to transform our behaviors in these types of conversations. It's just a matter of transforming your behavior. It's and when I say transform, just change. So if you and I are having a debate and I see that we're not getting anywhere, we're competing. And when I use the term competing in viewpoints, I am talking about I'm trying to influence you or make you believe what I believe. That's control.
Mhm.
You're telling me that my interests don't matter. These are the interests that you should be concerned about. When I talk about interests, I'm talking about your concerns, your needs. So I'm fighting for my needs when I'm choosing a political candidate. And that's what I want you to understand without me saying it. So what you need to do is to be aware of what is going on. Watch body language.
Yes.
You look at the body language. You can tell if someone is getting irritated in the conversation.
Yes.
You can tell when someone is beginning to be disagreeable. You
Yes.
know when someone is trying to control the conversation, someone is trying to influence you to believe the way that you believe. Take note. Sometimes I say, you know what? We use the term exhale or we use the term woosah. Take a step back and take a look at what is going on in the exchange. Did the person raise their voice?
You mentioned changing our behaviors, and two thoughts came to mind. One is, and I love acronyms, one is an acronym that says WAIT. Why am I talking? So to your point, if I'm talking to convince you that you're wrong and I'm right, I need to wait and think about that. And then you mentioned changing our behaviors. And a mentor of mine who's since passed, he wrote a book talking about the affirmation principle. And he talked about leaders imploring human affirming behaviors. And when we use human affirming behaviors, I think what we're saying is, I value the relationship more than I value whether or not we're going to win this argument. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. And that's one of the things that you always want to keep into the forefront of your mind is how you value the relationship. Do you want, like you had said earlier, do you want to be friends and family and in love with these people at the end of the election?
Yes.
And so if the answer is yes, if you value the relationship, then you must seek to understand where the person is coming from. In the forefront of our minds, we have to always remember that going into any election, people have interests. And my interest is not going to be your interest. And we are different and our needs are different. And that's one of the behaviors that we have to model when we have these conversations. You are not me, and I am not you.
Mm-hmm.
Just listen to what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When I'm talking about what my needs are, I need, to give you an example, not me per se, but someone in a conversation can say, I need health care. Or another person may say, immigration matters to me because I have family in Haiti, or I have families in Mexico, and I want them here with me. That is my need. So when you take a step back and you try to empathize
Mm-hmm.
the person's needs, then you can dispel or you can manage debate as they are associated with political conflicts of interest, because that's what they are, political conflicts of interest.
When you mention the word debate, a technique comes to mind. And
Okay.
it goes back to what you said about active listening. So let's say you have an argument. When I say argument, I don't mean, a discussion, but your argument for this particular case is X, Y, and Z. And I happen not to agree with you, but I can say, I hear your point. I see you're passionate about X, Y, and Z, and here's where we agree. And my point of view is, and so the whole idea goes back to what you said about hearing them, testing your knowledge, making sure that what they have said is the message that you have received. And before you go forward to state your point, you give them that opportunity to say, yes, you got it right, or no, this is what I really meant. And then honestly, find a point that you can agree with, even if it's you're just as passionate about your point as I am about my point.
Exactly.
And the one word we always want to stay away from is but, because the minute you say but, you negate everything that has happened. And basically it's saying, yeah, I heard you, but you're still wrong. Instead of
Exactly.
I heard you, I'm validating you, and here's what I'd like to bring to the conversation. But when we get in the heat of a discussion, it's hard to remember all that. So what can we do? Do you have a tip or a best practice for us that would allow us to still value this person and share our voice in the heat of the moment when we may not be thinking about these 4 particular points?
Right. So when your conversation moves from collaborating to competing, because that's what's happening. You always start off in a collaboration. We're discussing things. And what ends up happening is at some point in this political debate, it turns into a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be aware of what's going on. Like I said earlier, we talk a lot about in conflict resolution body language. Like right now, our body language is showing that you and I are understanding one another and we're actively listening.
Mm-hmm.
If you find out that someone has turned around and folded their arms,
Mm-hmm.
That means that right now they're closed off. That's
Or
what
the famous eye roll.
Right, the eye roll,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the poker face,
Right.
You must be aware of did they raise their voice? That's the key. If someone raises their voice, sometimes people deflect. So in other words, when they begin to deflect from the original issue, that they have basically checked out and the conversation is going into a completely and different direction. And when they deflect, you become defensive. Those are the things that you want to take note of. They become personal too. People sometimes change things and twist them and make them personal. The attack's personal in political debates. They do.
And I want to talk about that. When you talk about deflection, why does it seem to be that is just the style of politics? Where did that even come from?
You know what? I don't even think it just occurs in politics, Anita. I think it occurs sometimes in fights, in disputes that people have in general,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the competing conversation, the idea that you want to influence me and make me think the way that you think.
Mm-hmm.
And when I run out of options, and I don't have anything else to say in my defense as it relates to the subject at hand, what I end up doing is I personally attack you.
Let me ask you this. You're talking about influencing. When we're trying to influence people, and help me out with this here, am I influencing you in my best interest, or is it because I want to influence you because I think it's in your best interest? Which one is
You
it?
know, I think it could be twofold.
Okay.
And number one, I think that it could be that maybe at some point a fact could be incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
So we can talk about facts, right? And I'm trying to influence you to help you to understand. It's just like a teacher in a classroom. Who made you the teacher, though? But we're friends. Let me help correct you in that area. It didn't happen in 1917. It happened in 1919. And so if you reject it, then that's a problem. Well, who made you the teacher? That's where the argument comes in. Okay. And then what was your other question? I'm sorry.
When we're influencing, are we influencing based on our best interest, or are we influencing because we really think it's in your best interest to change the way you're thinking?
So I think that the fact base is in your best interest.
Okay.
And then sometimes the control is in mine. And it's at the point of me winning the debate and you losing. And that's what happens when we have competing conversations. And you always know when it's a competitive conversation.
Mm-hmm. You can tell when the tide is turning. So when we're talking about fact-based, and again, just to keep this completely out of politics, let's say that the facts that we're talking about is 2 + 2 = 4. You can't
exactly.
That. But for whatever reason, someone else thinks 2 + 3 = 4. Mm-hmm. Okay. What if with all the facts that you have in hand, they're still not getting it?
You know what?
Is it time to just shut it down?
Then at that point, right. So in other words, you've moved from collaborating, which means it's a mutual communication exchange, to competitive communication exchange. Mm-hmm. And now the next thing is probably to avoid the conversation, but not permanent, because it becomes pointless. Yes. And I don't like using the word pointless, but it does. It's fruitless. Mm-hmm. It's at no point. It has no goal. Mm-hmm. There's no goal to it at that point. Mm-hmm. So, and Anita, and it's even biblical. We know that it's biblical. And sometimes I have to talk about things that are biblical because of the fact that I am a Christian woman and I am a teacher in the church. But the Bible tells us to avoid these types of foolish conversations because they're pointless. They don't go anywhere, and mm-hmm. they create strife. Mm-hmm. So at that point, when we talk about avoidance, we want to avoid it. Do we avoid it permanently? It depends. Do mm-hmm. we sidestep it, or do we just avoid it temporarily? And when the time is right, you mm-hmm. can come back to it.
Now, I have a good friend that said to me, Dr. Anita, I love my husband to pieces, but we just do not see eye to eye on politics. And it's very bothersome to her that at the end of the day, she goes upstairs and watches her political shows, and he stays down there and watches his political shows. And honestly, I don't know how to advise her. What would you recommend?
If experience is the best teacher, mm-hmm. if your experience time and time again, when it comes down to politics, and if her experience, and when it comes down to politics and her husband, and you have a valuable relationship, and if you know that that's something that you should never discuss, then my thing is that don't discuss it. That's my advice. I would say don't discuss it. There's 1,000,001 other things that you all can discuss in your marriage. And I keep saying you all. And the reason why I say you all is because I don't even know why, but I know that you're talking about your friend. I would just tell her, talk about something else. Yeah. How about that?
The discussion that we're having right now reminds me of psychological safety and those 5 factors. And I talk about them often, especially when I'm talking with leaders. And the word safety in this particular context is an acronym. The S is security, the A is autonomy, the F is fairness, the E is esteem, and the T is trust. And it seems to me that when we're talking about having conversations specific to politics, everyone wants fairness for themselves and for everybody else. You
They
know,
do.
that's the idea of the fairness driver when we talk about psychological safety. And when I think about fairness, the example that comes to mind was this whole college scandal where these people paid all this money to have their daughters put into the best schools. And as a nation, it really incensed our sense of fairness that you already have all the advantages in the world and you still have to go and pay to make sure that your daughters get other advantages that people don't have. Now, don't get me wrong. If you've got money and you've been blessed, God bless you. Do what you want with your money. But again, as a nation, our sense of fairness was very much compromised. And so when I think about the psychological safety factor of fairness, and when I think about politics, it seems as though people are also thinking about, well, what's fair for me and my for and no more. How do we get beyond that type of thinking?
You know what? You can't, because people are different, Anita, and everybody is going into this with their own needs. And people, I just, in my experience, people think about their own needs. And when that's why they choose the people that they choose. Well, I'm doing good because I got an income tax return and I don't pay that much in my payroll taxes. So I'm standing my ground. It's not fair. And, and you can't make it fair. I had an instructor tell me one time, he told me in a setting, he said, there's no such thing as fairness. Don't look at things expecting people to be fair. And if you actually think about some of your life experiences, are people always fair? Can you expect people to be fair, but fairness is not always what you get. And that's the problem with the political debates that we have, the political conflict. People don't look to the needs of others. They look to how they benefit and their interests, and therefore no more. They do.
It seems like we used to have conversations and we used to make decisions based on the greater good. And I don't see that happening anymore.
I don't either. I don't either, Anita. We are so divided. And like your friend, her household is divided.
Mhm.
And we're divided. I mean, everywhere you look, you see division. And then you have people who don't do anything to help seal the breaches and the cracks, because everybody takes their side on the right and everybody takes their side on the left, and everybody is positional. But I believe that I like the idea of maintaining relationships and restoring relationships. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about transforming behaviors, because when you use transforming behaviors, you're telling people the relationship matters. That's
So
what, go ahead.
is there a way that we can look at politics and not be positional? Because I completely understand folks are trying to, vote according to their interests. I get that. But how else can we approach politics without necessarily being positional? Or is that not even possible?
Positional. Let me think. I don't, you said something earlier. You said the greater good of the people. And I think that if we look at politics for the greater good of the people and how most of the people will benefit, I think that would solve some of the problems. But people don't look at it as the greater good of the people. They look at it as a right, as a left. They look at it based on their fears. They look at it and based on, it's all personal.
It's very personal.
It's just personal. And the needs, when you start talking about conflict, we have conflict, whether it be political, religious, all of our conflicts are based on our unique needs and desires.
Yes.
And when I talk about unique needs and desires, Anita, it's personal, and we become positional to protect our needs. We really do. So if you have a candidate that is promising something that's going to meet your needs and you're going to benefit from it, you're not thinking about the greater good of all
So
the
let me
people.
ask you this: when we're thinking about the candidates that are making promises to us, and
Mhm.
now I want to get a little bit away from the discussions right now. Again, this is not meant to be a political discussion, but I am having this conversation to help us prepare for a very crucial election that we have coming up. And you talked about, the candidates that make promises to us. And
Right.
I had mentioned the psychological safety factors and trust being one of them. And I know you're huge on research. How can we make sure that the information we're given, that the information that we see is trustworthy? How do you approach research?
So one of the ways that I approach research is I have a library here at home. I've always wanted a library. So I read books, I read history, because like I said earlier, I mentioned the word facts. We want to base a lot of what we do is based on historical facts. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to go to the history books. Then my second suggestion is that if you're going to use the internet,
Which most people do.
right, don't
Right.
so you use the internet, you do your own research, and you use research on reputable sites. Sites where the data has been tested and it can be backed up. You always want to use reputable sites.
How do you
Don't
know what a reputable site is?
Well, something, one of the things that I do with a reputable site is that sometimes I fact check. But in addition to that, I use government websites. I use PBS, which is a historical site. Sometimes the .org websites, but I don't use websites that seem to be biased for one side to another, because they have websites out there that are biased.
Now, here's the thing.
Yes.
And I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute, because if you're always looking on sites that agree with what you're saying, are you even sensitive to what a bias is anymore?
You're not. I have a cousin who posted something once on social media. And that's another thing I was going to say. So not only the internet, but even specifically the social media. You can't always believe everything that you see on social media either. So I have a cousin who posted something that was very biased on social media. And I spoke to it. And I said, why are you perpetuating this? This isn't true. And he fired back. He said, well, I didn't say it. This woman said it. And I said, you know what? It's not true. And you're perpetuating lies. And here's the website. You go and you research it for yourself. When he researched it for himself, remember earlier I talked about facts. He took it down because it wasn't true. It was slanderous in nature, and he was perpetuating lies. And this is a family member, but I value the relationship with him, and he values the relationship with me. And it was offensive. And he took it down. It was offensive to his mother and his father, and he took it down. So when we talk about information, you always want to test it. Test it against the history books. Test it against what was actually said. Sometimes, you have people that quote things, and it's like, no, he didn't say that. She didn't say that. Take it down.
Or sometimes things are taken out of context intentionally to give innocent dialogue a completely different meaning that is intended to be inflammatory. And that's not cool.
And I'm sorry for interrupting. And that's the influence and the control that we talked about earlier. All of this, we're looping everything back into what causes conflict, Anita. The idea that you want to influence and to control and to make sure that people believe that the way that you want them to believe by perpetuating lies and data that's not really real. So you want to use reliable and reputable sources. And then if a video is available, go back and review the entire video.
Right, because sometimes we just look at the pieces that align with what we're thinking, And
Exactly.
across the bottom of the screen here, I've got your 3 conflict resolution tips for us. The first one being value the relationships. The second is collaboration. And the third, sometimes you just have to avoid these conversations altogether, which is a shame because, it would be nice if we could at least be willing to understand one another. What else do you have to share with us, Ms. Vicky? Because this conversation has been so rich, and I really hope that people will consider the things that we have said, because truly it is about valuing the relationships, whether it's a family member, whether it's a coworker, whether it's somebody on the street. People can act crazy on the street just by putting their opinions out there.
They are. So, one of the things that, I want to say is that, even though I value the relationship. When you value the relationship, you should be able to sit down, to be honest, Anita, and collaborate. But sometimes that collaboration will turn into competitive behaviors. And when you start talking about a competitive conversation, that's when people become disagreeable, because now you're controlling, you're trying to influence. So when collaboration turns into competing, then it's probably best to temporarily avoid the conversation if you value the relationship.
Now, help me understand something, because when you collaborate, there's going to come a time where you're going to need to ask a question to clarify something.
Yes.
How is it that people can take something as simple as asking an innocent question and get all heated about it? What is going on there? Is it more to do with that person that the question is being asked of than it is from the person asking the question?
No, it isn't. It's because of when you ask it. You've already moved past collaboration, and you're already in that competitive mode. And so when you feel as if you've already switched from collaboration to competitive, because you feel as if they already feel that you're influencing them, that you're trying to influence them. They already feel that you're trying to control them. And once you feel that you have passed collaboration, I would just listen, and I would listen attentively. And I would let them know I understand what you're saying. And I would postpone the rest of the conversation, or use the term avoid the rest of the conversation, until there's a better time to discuss it again.
So I hear what you're saying. Just, take the temperature of the conversation and the way it's going, the body language. I'm still really not clear as to how asking questions can turn a conversation into something different. And the reason I'm asking is because when I work with leaders and adults, when we give feedback, there's that whole sandwich technique: say something nice, say what they got to fix, and then say something nice. And my philosophy is ask questions. Well, how do you think you did? How did you achieve your goal? What would you have done differently? Who would you have spoken to? So when I'm asking open-ended questions in a feedback type setting, it's very welcome. Why don't questions like that happen in this type of setting?
So once again,
those questions that make someone defensive.
So once again, it's when you ask. So sometimes you've asked because you've already gone beyond collaboration and you're in a competitive mode. And then also, you don't know the emotional state of the person entering into the conversation.
Okay.
So, sometimes, like you're saying, well, when I want feedback, well, a lot of times people don't think that feedback is constructive. They feel picked on. Everything is not constructive. However, and then some things are. And even when it is constructive, when a person enters into this type of an exchange, you don't always know their emotional state.
True.
If you don't understand their emotional state, you might get anything from them. Their response can be anywhere from pleasant to unpleasant. So, but when you realize, and once again, when you realize that people are taking an issue with the question that you're asking them, back off, back away, sidestep the issue temporarily, avoid it temporarily, and then you can talk about it at a different time. And it works. I'm sure you've done it, and it works. It works in my home. If I want to make things personal, sometimes they're saying when you have conversations, you make some of your conversations personal so that people will understand. I have a husband here, and sometimes we're in conversations where we don't always agree. And when we don't agree, I can tell when the conversation has moved from collaboration to being competitive.
Right.
I can tell. And so what I've learned to do is to just temporarily avoid the conversation, sidestep it, and switch to something else or just in the conversation. And then when the time is right, we talk about it again.
So that it almost sounds like, in addition to the tips that we have scrolling across the bottom, it sounds like before you even get there, you might want to take the temperature in terms of someone's emotional state to decide whether or not they can actually hear you without emotions getting in the way. And we are emotional creatures, but clearly if someone had a bad day, that's not a time to discuss a topic, right?
Timing is everything.
Timing
is everything. Someone can come in the house and say, oh, how was your day? Did you have a good day? Well, what was so good about it?
Right.
You know, and so you ask, and then that right there can start a debate. You know, I simply ask you about your day. I didn't need that type of feedback. You know, exactly. And so in other words, so you know, you're right. You sometimes you don't know. And this is why we end up with debates, and we must be able to determine the behavior in a conversation so that we will know, should we keep going or should we temporarily avoid it? You know, you have to know.
Yes. Yes. Now that takes me to one last thought. So you have already said early in the conversation that communication, and we know this, a lot of communication is our facial expressions. It's our body language. It's the tone in our voice. And I think you know where I'm going. So when we see things on social media, first of all, we need to remember that people don't view the world as it is. They view the world as they are. And to your point, if I read something on social media on a bad day versus if I read something on social media on a good day, I'm going to have a different reaction. That being said, when things are posted on black and white, we have no tone of voice. We can't see someone's body language. We can't see their facial expression. My thought is, number one, you don't have to reply to everything. You don't have to respond to everything. And number two, when you do, be very, very careful of your word choice, because again, people are not reading your message based on your internal intent. They're reading their message based on what they're seeing and what they may be externally impacted by. And the whole point of being careful about word selection is we need to manage the intent of our words with the impact that our words actually have. So give us some guidelines about responding to everything and anything that we see on social media.
Okay, you know what I've learned, to be honest, just in my personal experience, is that typically when we respond on social media, we respond to our friends. We respond to people that are Facebook friends, people that we think we know. And
wait, say that again. What'd you just say? People that what?
We think we know.
We think we know. Okay. So people can show up a little different on Facebook, huh?
It is, exactly. Social media. Social media is a beast, right?
Yes, it is. And you better know how to tame it. Yes.
It really is. But what I would do is to answer your question. And what I've learned is that, number one, you don't have to respond to everything. And then number two, you can't retone into it. And you know from experience how the people are going, how the person is going to respond to your post. And it just goes back to what we were talking about with avoidance. You know, some things, it's foolish. You know, there's no goal, there's no point to it. If there's no point to it, if it's pointless, it doesn't do anything, then don't respond. Read it and keep going, you know, because you have to, some people, for the people that you do know, you value the relationship. You know, I don't want people calling me about my posts. I've had people call me about posts on Facebook. I don't want people doing that. Let that stay on Facebook. So what's that saying to you? You don't agree with what's on Facebook. So now you want to take it from Facebook and you want to talk about it. So to eliminate all of that, because it's still pointless, it's still fruitless, let it go. Let it
That's
go.
the number three,
Just
avoidance.
let it go. That's the avoiding. Because what you end up doing is, to be honest, you end up with a competitive conversation. And I keep using that word competitive conversation. The competitive conversation means you are positional and I'm position. We are arguing our positions. You're not going to relent on your position. I'm not going to relent on mine. So that means I'm going to try to influence you to feel the way that I feel, and I'm going to try to control how you feel. I'm going to prove my point that you are wrong for feeling the way that you feel about your personal political interests. And we're not getting anywhere because as it stands, I'm still concerned about what I'm concerned about. My needs are still my needs at the end of the day. And so what we want to do is with those behaviors, Anita, we want to transform our behaviors even on social media.
Yes.
Don't respond to everything.
That's wisdom. Don't respond to everything. And when you do respond, take your time and be thoughtful about it. Well, this has been a conversation. I do pray that it will be timely, that it will save some hurt feelings and save some relationships and maybe save some marriages. Because the last thing we need in this critical election season is to lose sight of relationships and valuing one another. And in some cases, considering the greater good.
Exactly.
I am so honored to have had Mrs. Vicky Brox Allen, a conflict resolution subject matter expert. You can tell she knows what she's talking about. She gave us some great examples. She gave us those 3 tips: value the relationship, collaboration, and if all else fails, avoid it. Because what's more important, to be right or to be in right standing with the people that you say you love and cherish? This has been another Real Conversation with Dr. Anita. And to catch all of my Dr. Anita podcasts, join me on my YouTube channel, Dr. Anita PhD. You can hear my Keeping It Real with Dr. Anita, my Insanity Check with Dr. Anita, and my Real Conversations with Dr. Anita. Always on Real Conversations, I'm looking forward to bringing subject matter experts to you so that you can leave equipped and empowered. Thank you so much for joining me, community. And until our next conversation, you know it, stay blessed and keep it real. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you.